The job I had at the time as an apprentice I hated and opportunity come by to get out of that and join the RAF. I've never looked back. 38 years I did. Yeah. Lots of different jobs in that period, mainly centring around aircraft maintenance and flying. But, a couple of jobs there and down as support command in Melbourne didn't go over very well. That's stuck in an office, as they literally say, counting nuts and bolts. I hated that, and managed to get out of that, and spent nearly 4 years in recruiting, which I found very enjoyable, but glad to get rid of that and back to the aircraft again. Did my recruit training at Richmond in 1957, and from there down to Wagga, where all the technical training takes place. You're there for nearly a year by the time you do the different courses, and over to Pierce in WA, working on vampires, and we had a Dakota there. We did a bit of work on that. That was there for nearly 2 years, and back to Wagga for more fitter course training, and then up to Richmond onto 11th Squadron Neptunes, which is that was good unit, good flying there. I wasn't flying, but it was a good aircraft to work on. They weren't originally fitted with just the 2 engines. Later on, before I got there, they fitted 2 jet engines, 2 J34, V34 jet engines, because I guess they modified the aircraft over the years, and they were pretty heavy, so it helped them take off with that extra weight. But they were old. 1966, I guess their time was up, and the Air Force was buying those P3s, the Orion aircraft, and at the same time they acquired the Caribous. A little bit before that they acquired the Caribous, and applied for the loadmaster training on the Caribous, was successful, and hence training at Richmond, numerous courses up, numerous exercises to New Guinea and whatever, and then eventually to Vietnam in December that year, 66. The wife had it pretty hard, actually. She didn't drive, and we were in married quarters in Windsor, but it's a fair way to the shop, and no family there, and which meant she had to basically push 2 kids in a pram up to the shops and bring all the tucker home and whatever, and it was pretty hard on her. And later on, when we got back from Vietnam, I was kind of interested in going on to Hercs as a flight engineer. She said, well, can without me. She was not interested in that, so we abandoned that career path. Now, it was very hard on her. And there was a few occasions there that a mail was torn up, the unknown persons. I'd sent back some packages, and they were smashed. So yeah, it was not a good time for that, for her. I think it was a bit of a resort town, French resort town it used to be, but there was no military activity there in my time, and you were pretty safe to go wandering around. Not that you had that much opportunity to, but we initially lived in the villa, which is right in town. A pretty basic old building, but it was good. The cooks there, they had a mobile kitchen, and they did a tremendous job in the facilities that they had there, and the number of people that they used to feed. Some of the food was the etherised eggs, took a bit of getting used to. But yeah, they did a pretty good job, but Vung Tau wasn't too bad. Everything starts early in the morning. Everybody wants to go flying at 8 o'clock, which means the ground crew have got to go and pre-flight the aircraft and have it all ready for you or for the crew. And you'd get out there half hour beforehand, do your own pre-flight, which was basically just doing a walk around, removing pitot covers and all those sorts of things, undercarriage pins, and getting your aircraft ready. The pilots would follow shortly by, doing their little bit of a walk around, and then from the Wallaby flight line, we taxi around to Charlie ramp, where you'd pick up your usually passengers first thing in the morning, and the air movements would give them to or load them onto the aircraft. And normally we go out via Luscombe or Neweydat, which is only a 15-20 minute flight. You'd either drop them off or pick people up from there. Engines running, they didn't shut down. And normally you go straight up to Tonsonite then, and depending on what run you're going to do, you'd offload there. And then we come under really under the control of the Americans. 405 mission going north, 406 mission you'd go south. North is up to Nha Trang, Pleiku, the Tukor area, and 6 was down the delta down to Long Swin, Antoy and that sort of places. And you're usually there for about half an hour, loading up, whatever, and off you go for the rest of the day. Landing, taking off, landing, taking off. Carrying mail on those two missions, 405, 406. American mail and Vietnamese mail. We used to have a little postman used to come with us. He's about the only real Vietnamese contact you ever had, and they were pretty good. Most of them could speak English, and they'd help you. There's one particular fellow, Ted, I've got, you just come across him quite a few times. He's quite friendly and, yeah, good little fella. And on the 405, we used to have an aircraft up in Nha Trang on detachment. They go up for a week, so I think it was, I get my days mixed up now, but you go up there Thursday, and the aircraft that was there, you take over from them. You'd stay Thursday, and then you work out of Nha Trang for the week. It was just a crew. We used to carry an extra groundie with us. Usually try and pick a friend, but I was engines, and so I'd try and pick an electrical or radio or an instrument fellow to come with us in case they could help service the aircraft. And then you'd be working for the Special Forces, doing resupplying out to, I think they call them the A camps. They're little small fields out in the Bundu. They were pretty interesting places. Some of them were quite small. One that comes to mind is Plain Me. It was about 1,100 foot long, and there was not much room to spare there. And there was, that's where the little fellas in the black suits didn't like you much. They used to take pot shots at you. So you'd come across 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and then you'd circle down. Load pilots would then orbit down to land. Invariably, you'd get a cup of coffee there. They were all pretty good, happy to see you. So you have a bit of a brew and off you go, and put a load to go somewhere else. But long days up there, working out on our train detachment. Usually airborne about 7 in the morning. You get back at somewhere over night time, service your aircraft, refuel or whatever. Go and have a beer and a bed. Sometimes you had too many beers, but yeah, it was pretty interesting up there on that detachment. It's in particular when the weather was clagged into a bit, some of those places took a bit of skill on behalf of the pilots to find them, because there's a lot of big hills up there, and there's other angry fellas, and they're all dirt runways. So some of them were slippery and slidey. Lucky we had some pretty good pilots. Any hitches that you had during the day, there usually weren't too many, but you'd write them up in the 500, which is the aircraft maintenance logbook, and hand it over to the ground crew. And they worked basically for night time to get it ready for tomorrow. When we were living in the villa, because it's about a 20-minute, half-hour drive from the airfield back into town, usually the day people are all knocked off and they're all having a beer and a game of darts or whatever, and so sometimes you got some tucker, or you got the pick of the tucker, but not too often. And when we moved out to the airfield, it must have been about July, I think it was, there was a shortage of water. And of course we wouldn't get back home until fairly late. For a while there was no showers. They had two 44-gallon drums of water. One was a wash and one was a rinse. There was one aircraft, I wasn't involved, but up in a place called Darlat, the pilots, these good pilots, misjudged the taxiway and taxied into a ditch and snapped the undercarriage off. There was a major repair job. I think it would have been an American aircraft. They would have just bulldozed it to the side, but our crowd, they sent a ground crew up to Darlat. They were there for a while, fixing up, jury-rigged the undercarriage up, and somebody flew it back down to Vung Tau to start with. And they got it back serviceable again, flying, and they were going into that short airfield at Playmee. That's 1,100-foot runway, and they used to have, I think, 40-degree flap, which is a lot of flap to go in there for a style landing, but you didn't use 40-degree flap very often. But this occasion they had it down, and pretty late on finals they selected the flap down and it went into an uncontrollable turn to the right, and they arrived. They're lucky to have survived, but there was something drastically wrong with the aircraft. But they got it back and went back to Vung Tau and tried rigging it and all sorts of stuff, and they ended up, and then there was something drastically wrong with the aircraft with full flap, but just uncontrollable. So they ended up, well, I actually flew it back with the crew, flew it back to Australia sometime later. That was in 1969, I think. It was 68, I forget now. But yeah, but we flew an replacement aircraft back up there in 68, and did some test flying on that aircraft before we headed home, and fair enough, go up to a few thousand feet and put 40-degree flap down and off she'd go. So we didn't use 40-degree flap coming home to Australia, but they put us a reduced fuel load, and we hopped down all the way back down to Sydney again. It took us weeks. We went to Butterworth, Singapore, Jakarta, Surabaya, Denpasar, Timor, Darwin, Mount Isa, and one other place, Corindai with it, and then to Richmond. Yeah, lots of stops. Normally we used to go straight from Kamau across about 25-minute flight across to the island. But this particular day, there was an airstrip up the other end which we never used to go to. I'd never been to before. We landed there and dropped something off, and there was only about a 15-minute flight back down to Antoy, and it was just a short flight. We flew low level down the other side of the island looking for Antoy, which is only a PSP runway. It's only quite short. There's a one-way, and we're looking for the airfield, and as you come around the headland, there it is. And it's a case of gear down, flaps down, and basically doing like an aircraft carrier type landing. I was in my seat doing my calculations to what we could take out of when we leave, take off from there. And next thing it was just bang, we hit the water. And yeah, it was a bit, didn't know what to do for a minute there. I guess I must have been a bit stunned or something, but it managed to get out of my seat, and there's a bit of an airspace there between that and the roof. And we had 14 passengers on board, plus our mail and whatever. And first thought was, got to get out of here. And the other crewman, my offsider, Dutchie Van Kessel, he was down the back of the aircraft. He had tried to open the cargo door, but because of the water, it wouldn't release. And there was an escape hatch on the rear starboard side, so I raced down there and pulled the handle. It fell out and away from the aircraft. But these passengers were Vietnamese, most of them, and they didn't want to get out because they couldn't swim. But yeah, we encouraged them to get out, and I hopped out myself, and we could see the pilots were up on top. They got out the front, and one of the passengers we had the day, I can't think of his name now, I think he was the 2IC of the task force. He came out to see how the Air Force operated, a lieutenant colonel or somebody. Anyway, we had a life raft in the aircraft, but it was still inside. So him and I went back into the aircraft to try and get the life raft out, but on impact, it had inflated underneath the seats, so that was a no-go. So we abandoned that and hopped back outside, but still the thought of the aircraft sinking was still in the mind. The door that I'd ejected, that was floating, so there's some of us hanging onto that, and the rest of them hanging onto the, gripping onto the side of the fuselage. There's a straight type of thing that runs down there, and they were hanging onto that or in the back of the wing. It floated for quite some time before they blew it up, I believe. And we're there for about 20 minutes, and of course the American Navy's at Antoi, and one of their gunboats comes scarpering across and to give us a hand, and because the freeboard on these gunboats is fairly high, and the sailor threw a rope over to me, but I just didn't have the strength to hang on to the rope, and so the sailor jumped overboard, tied a rope round me, and then they pulled me up, and oh Jesus, that hurt. That really, really hurt. I had some broken ribs, or fractured ribs, and yeah, so they then took me over to they had a hospital ship. There's not a ship as such as a big barge. It was a hospital barge, and they took me over to that. And one of the other passengers we had was a doctor from the Australian surgical team. I think his name is Dr. Hal Stanistreet. He's a fairly well-known doctor in the Wangaratta area, and he stayed on board the hospital ship with me, looking after me. But I can remember him in the fairly late hours. He's trying to plead with one of the crewmen on the sailors on this ship, because they don't drink have grog on American ships. He said, surely you got some medicinal alcohol here I can have, because he was pretty shaky too. Yeah, so he fixed me up there. We had a few bits and pieces missing, and the next day they flew another aircraft down and picked us all up and took us back to Vung Tau. But the culmination of that was because we had to go back to Kamau to refuel for the next stage, and as we were, and I was sitting here, and my CO and the other co-pilot was sitting there opposite, and as we were circling to go into Kamau, there was a hell of a bang, and a bloody tracer round went up come up through the floor, through the roof. It frightened the hell out of me. I don't think anybody else was too impressed either, but yeah. So, yeah, back to Vung Tau. It's in 36 Vac Hospital there. The Americans run that. And they were pretty good. I was there for, I can't remember now, it must have been 2 or 3 days. And then they shipped me over to 4F at Butterworth. But one of the problems I had there was I had blood in the urine, and so I used to go to hospital every day, take samples, and after a while they said, "You're right." So I had to spend about nearly a month over there. I was trying to get back to Vung Tau, but just couldn't get an aeroplane back. The ground fire was the thing, but we never got any serious hits. We didn't anyway, but it was kind of like a badge. You weren't in the club until you got a few holes. But luckily for them, they always seemed to hit up the back end of the aeroplane. But although these special forces camps are out in the Bundu, in the boondocks type of stuff, and Charlie was, I guess I'm so pretty close by, but looking for anything to shoot at or whatever. So they'd come across at 4,500, 5,000 feet, establish communications. This is the pilots. They'd establish communications with the camp to establish that it's safe to come in. They would then throw smoke to the wind direction, and then you circle, just circle, as tight a circle as you could over the camp to land. And the same thing as when you left. You empty, of course, but take off and then circle out. Sometimes it wasn't always possible in bad weather. One out of Pleiku, a lot of the times we carried fuel, drums of fuel for the Mogas petrol, and I had a Grandy come with us to give us a hand, my Curly King, Radtech, and we were going from Pleiku to a place called Playmarong. We had 15 drums of petrol on board, and it wasn't that far, so the pilots elected to just do it low level, and of course it happened, it was low level. Little fella down, he takes a shot at you. So we got there safely, dropped off our drums of petrol and went back to Pleiku. Another load of 15 drums of petrol back to Playmarong again. And this Curly King came up to me, he said, "Isn't it the same way we went last time?" He wasn't too keen on going back the same way again. But they never had a shot at us next time. Before 2 Squadron got up there, I can remember on one occasion there was a plot was to try and set the jungle on fire and drive the bad guys towards the army forces or out in the diggers, and so they've mixed up I think about 10 drums of fuel on the back of the aircraft, and the safety equippos, John was it, Corporal John, I can't think of his surname, he rigged up little parachutes onto smoke canisters and onto the top of the drums, and the idea was that the 9 Squadron choppers, when these things out, when we dropped them, the drums of fuel out, I can't remember how high it would have been, probably a couple of thousand feet, I can't remember now, but when the drums hit the slipstream, these little parachutes would pull the pin out of the smoke grenade or smoke generator so that the choppers could see the drums and whatever and shoot them with their machine guns. I don't know how successful I was, but I don't think the jungle caught fire either, but yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? Out of Pleiku and out of Nha Trang, we used to carry a lot of cattle up there. Chooks or fowls, I didn't have, a lot of people had pigs. Well, I never had any pigs, but they had a lot of cattle. They weren't always cooperative. They all had nose rings, and you tie them to the seat belts. And they all had a great affinity. They didn't have toilet paper, and they all seemed to like to bloody do their business as soon as they got the aeroplane. So there was crap everywhere. Get the fire trucks to come down, up through the bottom hatch and hose out. Yeah, good job. Jim Gussie and the ABC band and the Ray Desmond, they put on a concert there. There was two camps. We had Vung Tau and the 9th Squadron fellas are out at, I think their camp was called the Adamoga, I think. But they put on a big concert out there. It was pretty good. But there's thousands of us out there. Yeah. But that's about the only real entertainment we saw. We used to get movies pretty often. Amongst the stuff we used to carry around in mail was to take movies, old movie reels out to the Special Forces camps, but they invariably get delayed one day, so that we watch them before we take them back out again. So we always had a pretty good supply of movies.